1, 2, 3.
Er wollte nur wissen, ob es funktioniert. Soll ich Ihnen das direkt auf den Platz legen hier?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to welcome you in this wonderful building. I am François Bourguignon. I am the chairman of the board of GDN. So a couple of welcome remarks. First, I would like to thank the Honorable Mayor Reinhard Limbach here, who will be talking a little later, Mr. Franz Fassmetz, all our panelists from around the world and our partners. And on behalf of the Global Development Network, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to this conference in Bonn. GDN is very pleased to bring you this conference in collaboration with several important partners whose work and presence in Bonn make it a significant location. In this endeavor, GDN has been partnering with the following organizations: the Bonn Alliance for Sustainability Research in its Innovation Campus in Bonn, ICB, with the German Development Institute, DIE, with the German Institute for Development Evaluation, DIVAL, and with the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security. All this under the auspices of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. The conference would not have been possible without their joint effort and their support. The partnership has helped to bring together a remarkable lineup of topics and speakers, and is helping us to spread conference discussion and conclusions to many parts of the developing world. I would be remiss not to mention the hard work put in by the staff from each of our partners to help make this fantastic world-class learning event. We're also most grateful for the support of the German Foreign Ministry, thanks to whom we have this magnificent historical venue where the German parliament used to sit before Germany's capital moved to Berlin. Not least, I need to mention the Sparkasse Stiftung, which has helped lure several young researchers to the conference by hosting a youth blog competition as part of the conference. And we are very pleased to welcome many of these young researchers here today. The Global Development Conference returns to Bonn after 20 years. It is a great satisfaction to be back to this city whose history goes much beyond having been the capital of West Germany before unification. Now, I would like to mention that several very famous names are associated with the city of Bonn. Everybody will know that Ludwig van Beethoven was born in Bonn. And from that point of view, this city certainly is known in the world. Maybe less known is the fact that another composer, Robert Schumann, was not born but died in Bonn, near Bonn, as a matter of fact, and in a sad way because he was internalized in a madhouse. But more interestingly, I found yesterday that a very important person, at least certainly for all of us here, studied in Bonn, in the Friedrich Wilhelm University. And this man is nobody else than Karl Marx. So I think that it is quite interesting to be in a city where maybe Karl Marx put together, or started to put together, his thought on the way to look at the world. Hopefully, history will also remember that GDN was launched 20 years ago in Bonn, in this place, in 1999. As well, I was there, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that it was the first time that this building was used for a public event after the parliament had left Bonn. So since then, the conference has been traveling around the world, 7 cities around the developing world, and it is returning to Bonn today, rich of an incredible experience about what was its initial objective, which is policy-oriented research for development. 20 years ago, the conference was entitled Bridging Research and Policy. Today, the conference is themed Knowledge for Sustainable Development, the Research Policy Nexus. As you can see, the homecoming is both geographical and thematic. Knowledge and understanding empower the right type of development action. Although the world has made huge progress over the last 20 years, our common future still crucially depends on how well we tackle global issues such as poverty, inequality, hunger, and maybe before all, environmental degradation. Still more than before, meaning 20 years ago, urgent action is needed to change the current development trajectory. Keep in mind that as of today's trends, the Sustainable Development Goals are unlikely to be reached before 2073, nearly half a century after the Development Agenda Horizon, which is 2030. The Global Development Network has been working tirelessly to facilitate a research policy interface through a range of programs. We all knew that knowledge is key to our future, but what we have learned is that to help development, knowledge needs to be localized, discussed with wide-ranging stakeholders, adopted into national strategy, and collectively tracked for success. There is nothing obvious in all this. What does it take for the world to put solid research-based evidence into sustainable development action? How can the process of research itself be strengthened? How can this be done in the face of uncertain times and indeed dwindling resources for research and research capacity in particular? These are difficult questions, and the choice of the word nexus in the title of this conference is a rather deliberate one. This conference is designed to illuminate a range of ways forward, from big data to new frontiers of evaluation, to knowledge architecture, to equitable knowledge systems, to how young researchers can influence policy, and much more. We very much look forward to engaging discussion among all of us over the next 2.5 days. And in this respect, we are proud that our call for papers at the conference received over 450 submissions, several of which will be presented at the conference. Thanks to our wonderful session organizers, we have a fantastic lineup of topics for you. We also organize many side events, an exhibition, a youth competition, and a poster display. By the way, I've been asked to recall you to please be sure to vote for your favorite poster on the conference app. Of course, as in any decent event, we have this kind of application. This gathering is blessed by 629 formal registrations as of this morning from all across the world. Participants have traveled to Bonn from 95 countries, representing most developing regions of the world, and from as far away as Ecuador, Iraq, Kyrgyzstan, and Somalia. Of course, Germany is well represented with 177 registrations, but we have 138 participants coming from sub-Saharan Africa. I should also add that about 294, that means 46.7% of our participants are women, quite close to the gender balance, but apologies for the missing 3.3%. Thank you all for coming. Your presence makes all the difference. I hope that you'll enjoy the conference, intervene in its numerous sessions, and will take advantage of the networking facilities it presents. All this with a view at linking more solidly research and policy whenever the opportunity arises. And now I would like the conference to begin, and it will begin by a presentation, by a few words, by the Honorable Mayor of Bonn, Mr. Bachmann.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bourguignon, Mr. Fasmetz, distinguished guests, and eminent conference speakers, conference partners, and supporters. Welcome to the 90th Global Development Conference here in our conference center, Bonn. I am delighted to join you this morning for the opening of your conference. Bonn is a place that sends out strong signals for sustainability, starting with the growing UN campus, the heart of the international Bonn. With you and Bonn and many key players in sustainability and development, we have become a center for international cooperation, shaping global sustainability. This gathering will be debating the very topics that made the city of Bonn an international center of learning and a global knowledge hub. Decisions that impact lives shall truly be based on the best available evidence and research. Science and research play a vital role in building a prosperous life for all citizens and solving the global and shared challenges of a sustainable development. You might find Bonn the perfect venue to discuss knowledge for sustainable development and to explore the research to policy nexus in particular. I'd also like to congratulate the Global Development Network for its 20th anniversary. In 1999, the world's governments committed to working together to foster knowledge for sustainable development here in Bonn. You have brought this commitment to life, and your due diligence will help us to further learn and connect. At this point, I extend a warm welcome to our local academic community with their strong focus on global knowledge exchange and bridging development gaps. They are our valuable partners, providing links between research and policy. This includes, of course, the Bayern Network on Biodiversity Research and the Bonn Alliance for Sustainability Research with its new Bonn Innovation Campus. Sustainability is a central theme in Bonn. In the middle of our dense sustainability cluster of federal ministries, development agencies, NGOs, academia, businesses, and the media, the UN is our strongest ally and catalyst. Through the 2030 Agenda, the United Nations provides an overarching framework to unite and streamline our efforts in this field. The SDGs guide our actions locally and globally on the ground, in our decentralized corporations and in international city networks. Our Mayor Ashok Sridharan is president of EGLE, Local Governments for Sustainability, and a network of nearly 2,000 jurisdictions pursuing the path of sustainable urban development. SDG action is visible here in Bonn in numerous ways. During large conferences hosted in the city, during the SDG Festival of Action here on the UN campus, or during the city's annual SDG Days. Our sustainability strategy adopted this year is our systemic agenda for sustainable urban development here in Bonn. You will find Bonn a nourishing ground, a wonderful platform for our debates and a place to connect to partners on site, a place to build new links between policy and research to strengthen the role of science and research in building a prosperous life for all citizens and in solving the global and shared challenges of development. Let me commend GTN as the organizer of the conference and express my gratitude to the organizing and supporting partners, namely the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the German Development Institute, the German Institute for Development Evaluation, the United Nations University, Institute for Human and Environmental Sustainability, and the Bonn Alliance for Sustainability Research Innovation Campus Bonn. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for bringing the Global Development Conference to Bonn in GDN's anniversary year. I wish you every success for your consultations, all the best for your important work, and a great time in the beautiful city of Bonn. Thank you very much.
Good morning. You probably expected here, following your program, Claudia Warning, and you will recognize I'm not Claudia Warning. My sincere apologies for her not being able to come today. She was called on short notice to accompany the minister to a visit to Norway and has asked me to step in to give some remarks on behalf of BMZ. I'm Frank Fass-Metz, Commissioner for Climate Policy and Development and Deputy Director General. Dear Pierre Jacquet, dear François Bourguignon, dear Mayor Limbach, distinguished participants of this conference. On behalf of Minister Geert Müller and the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, we would like to call it BMZ shortly only. On behalf of BMZ, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all at the 19th Global Development Conference here in the city of Bonn. This impressive gathering today, I learned from François Bourguignon, more than 600 participants registered, scientists, practitioners, committed members of civil society, marks the 20th anniversary of the Global Development Network, and my sincere congratulations for your anniversary. During the past 2 decades, GDN has contributed decisively to the emergence of truly collaborative research in a worldwide dimension, uniting the formerly separated and fragmented research for development communities from the global south and from the global north. One of GDN's unique added values is that it provides researchers from the global south with vast opportunities and incentives to interact globally and engage in substantive global collaborative work. In this sense, I find it especially laudable that GDN has moved its headquarters to New Delhi already as early in 2005. And the strong participation of researchers from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and other regions at this conference goes into the very same positive direction. 20 years after your first gathering here in our federal city of Bonn, the UN city of Bonn, and I learned in the same building, you have returned to Bonn. The very few of you that were already here in 1999 will remember the tremendous transformation Bonn has undergone and has shaped the town differently, and Mayor Limbach spoke about it. Since 1999, Bonn has turned into a hub of sustainability, where challenges with worldwide dimension are being addressed by a network of UN entities, federal ministries, intergovernmental organizations, and international NGOs, scientific institutions, and not to forget globally operating enterprises. In the global area, the change which has occurred since 1999 is even more evident. The late 90s were still marked by an historic optimism, whose conceptual framework was laid by Francis Fukuyama, The End of History. The worldwide triumph of the liberal order, the commitment to multilateralism, the rule of law, protection of human rights, social responsibility, equitable growth, and peaceful cooperation between democracies seemed to be the way the world would move ahead. The concept of human history as dialectically transgression from the liberty of the few to the liberty of all, originally designed by the German philosopher Friedrich Hegel, whose 250th birthday anniversary we are going to mark next year, not only Beethoven, appears to be true. Also in the sphere of development cooperation, it was a time of dynamic optimism. Bilateral and multilateral debt initiatives who provided relief to countries suffering from high debt burden and delivered positive effects which are still witnessed today. We had the so-called Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness later in 2005. And we now also have, since 2015, the Agenda 2030 with the Sustainable Development Goals. We have the Paris Agreement to address climate change, which all mark the direction development should go. We know that we cannot achieve development objectives without addressing climate change, and we cannot address climate change without addressing development objectives. Both needs to come together. If you look back to 1999 and watch the archived video of the 1999 GDN conference on YouTube, you will find that historic optimism, which transpires also from that gathering in the manner that still inspires us today. Now, 20 years later, multilateralism has come under stress, which we saw the last years. Democracy in some places has come under stress. Constituent elements of modernity, such as intercultural tolerance, compassion, and solidarity, have equally come under stress. Against this background, it is even more important to maintain and cultivate the functioning global networks such as GDN. One main merit of your track record over the past 20 years undoubtedly is that you have helped bridging the global knowledge gap, which had been identified as a major impediment to development. Also, in our German development cooperation system, we are largely benefiting from the remarkable progress achieved so far in closing that global knowledge gap. To give you one example, China, which had been labeled as a developing country, some still continue to label it as a developing country, for some decades now has accumulated so much expertise in delivering aid to others that tripartite partnerships at eye level have become possible. This is why Minister Gerd Müller and Minister Song Chang from China have initiated the Sino-German Center for Sustainable Development in 2019. Under this umbrella, China and Germany are combining their international efforts towards building an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future with third countries, with a focus particularly on Africa and equally involving the business sector and relying on accompanying research. China is also a very active partner in our network managing global governance, which is operated by the German Development Institute and brings together participants from rising powers from the South and from Europe to participate in a dialogue and advanced training program. It is the overarching purpose to support the development of future drivers of change who are able to address global challenges and dedicate themselves to transformational change. I hope that some of the numerous young attendants of this conference will be able to participate also in the MGG program in the pursuit of their professional careers. Ladies and gentlemen, at the time when a variety of international operating actors are striving for a comprehensive manipulation of public opinion by a systematic spread of false and fabricated news, which have been labeled fake news, one major remedy against this worrying trend is our steady orientation towards evidence and impact. I'm therefore very happy that you have devoted large parts of your ambitious conference program to issues like brokering rigorous evidence, harnessing impact investments, measuring research capacity, shaping digital transformation, and promoting ethical standards of research. It is a happy coincidence that this year's Nobel Prize in Economics has been assigned to Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kramer for their experimental research results on alleviating global poverty. And my sincere congratulations go to Abhijit Banerjee, a former board member of GDN. Over the past 2.5 decades, the three of them have contributed decisively to improve our knowledges of effectiveness of development interventions in various sectors and specific contexts. I'm sure that the rich and varied work will also trigger and inspire debates in the coming 2.5 days of your conference. We at the Federal Ministry at BMZ have underlined the importance of an independent evaluation system by the formation of the German Institute of Development Evaluation more than 7 years ago now. I'm very grateful to DEWAL that on top of their challenging evaluation agenda, they have accepted to co-organize this conference together with the German Development Institute and GDN. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply convinced that for a successful implementation of development strategies, programs, and projects, we need a constant exchange between researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and the civil society in a broader context. Therefore, it remains valid that Harley Breedy from the World Bank said at the first Global Development Conference in 1999, the name of the game is to network. So 20 years later, this is still the central aim of this impressive gathering. And in this sense, I wish all of us happy networking in the upcoming 2.5 days, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Limbach. Thank you very much, Mr. Fassmetz, for these inspiring remarks and for your good wishes for this conference. Now, we are already a bit late, so I am calling immediately the first plenary session. I was about to say, let's get into the real matter. So if those panelists would like to come here, and I leave the floor, I'm not sure this is this mic, maybe another one, to the chair of this session.
So, good morning. Choose your seat wherever you like. Pierre Jacquet from the GDN, Amanda Glassman from the Center for Global Development, John Young from INASP, and Mauricio Cardenas,
But do you have a microphone?
Colombia.
Oh, no. Here it comes.
I think I have to pass the mic on. No, you're getting your mics. I'm coughing a bit, and that's why I'm speaking through this mic, so I can just put it away. There? Okay. No, please have the seat there. It's fine. It's fine. So.
And Mr. Ndu.
And Mr. Nyungu, there you are. Happy to see you here. So, welcome to you all. We're starting with the first plenary. I'm confident that we can maybe not have the full hour, 90 minutes, but go beyond the 60 minutes. My name is Imme Scholz. I'm the acting director of the German Development Institute, and I'm very happy to moderate this opening panel. So this panel is on from research to sustainable development action, how far have we come? And I would like to share some introductory thoughts with you to make clear what we want to discuss this morning. Some of the questions have already been mentioned by François Bourguignon in his introduction, and I think also Frank Fasmetz from the ministry added some to them. I would like to make 2 points. The first is that when we look at the state of the world as a whole, or at regional level or country level, we clearly see that there are a number of pressing and very large problems that require not only urgent action, as structured in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, for example, or in the Paris Climate Agreement, but this action needs to address the systemic and structural causes of these problems, which is obviously quite difficult because you have to understand in which way this system we are in now has contributed intrinsically to produce these problems. And you have to be clear where incremental and where radical change is required. And what we also see is that these changes are required everywhere. So this is not anymore about the South catching up in its development process with the North, but it's about transformative change at a universal level in different ways, with clearly very different resource equipment. So inequality is a part of that problem. So decarbonization, when we look at climate change, we need to change land use. When we look at biodiversity losses, and we need to change a lot when we think about inequality, not only income inequality, but inequality of gender, and also in ethnic terms. And what I understand the 2030 agenda has actually done is has to tell us that when we think about development, the parameter is not to mainly achieve successful economies, but to achieve sustainable societies. So to think of economic change, advances in growth, in productivity, in employment, in an embedded way, requiring a different view of societies and its institutions. So this is, I would say, the first challenge we are meeting, new understandings of prosperity, of development and transformation pathways to which no blueprints are available, and where we have to factor in the global interdependencies. And the second challenge is, I quote a famous person, listen to the science. Yeah? That's what Greta Thunberg says. And she refers to climate science. Now, that is the cry of young people all over the world who have joined her movement. So it is clear that this systemic transformation I'm talking about requires knowledge, and it requires a close interaction between policymakers, researchers, and citizens. Now, what is the science in our case? Do we have a unified development science? Is it so clear to say whom to listen to? How good are we when we speak to policymakers? Do we want a unified science? I think what we probably want is, on both sides of this relationship, policy and science, we want openness for a diversity of methodological and theoretical approaches, of ethical approaches. Development has a lot to do with ethics. So openness and diversity, and we want also inclusion. We want the freedom to express diverging views and ask difficult questions. If these difficult questions aren't asked, transformation is probably not going to happen. So these two things, are we as researchers responding to the questions of the young generation, of policymakers? What is our understanding as researchers? Do we describe ourselves as engaged science or as responsible science? What types of knowledge are needed for transformation processes? Well, these are the questions I would like to discuss with you. I have informed the panelists beforehand on that, and I have asked you to prepare short statements and to choose your topics. So I would like to start with Amanda Glassman from the Center for Global Development.
Okay, thanks very much, Emma, and thank you to the Global Development Network for the opportunity to be here with you today and to my co-panelists. So for the past 2 years, I have been part of a United Nations panel that prepared an independent report called the Global Sustainable Development Report. And it really tried to look at how science should underpin that transition and conceptualization of development from just economic development to sustainable societies. And to try and give some shape to the multiple synergies and interactions that are present across the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. All of that is common sense, and we all understand that there's an enormous amount of interdependence and interaction, but the challenge is to optimize outcomes across a range of areas. How would we even begin to approach it? It's much easier said than done. And the way that we organize ourselves in the social science and the research communities does not help at all with this issue. I can tell you that we spent 2 years tussling over terminology. We would describe phenomena differently. The economists would fight with the geographers, would fight with the physicists. That was extraordinarily inefficient, but there isn't a unified science, as you're pointing out, Emma, and there are big downsides to having a unified science as well. We had to come up with a consensus document, so in the end we put a lot of things under the carpet. But as we meet here today, I think it's important to consider that it's completely fine to have multiple views and disciplines attacking the same problems, and that is a healthy place to be. And that we might not necessarily think about a unified science, but instead reflecting that totality of insights from across disciplines that are important. I mean, even a big idea from the climate community, like the tipping point idea, is received with enormous skepticism by many economists. And so if you don't accept the premise that is behind the SDGs, right, that we have to be in balance between climate and development goals, and that these have to come together some way, we have an issue in terms of how we discuss this idea and how we come up with policy solutions. The other big issue that came up during this group's discussions were around the fact that there are synergies and interactions in sustainable development goals does not mean there are no trade-offs between them. I'm sure I don't have to tell that to this group, but on the contrary, the idea is that science is supposed to help us to elucidate and quantify those trade-offs. And to give a very mundane example in the health economics field where I work, the Health Sustainable Development Goals have health outcome goals, and then they have a goal about reducing impoverishment related to out-of-pocket health spending. Well, those two goals do not mean the same thing in terms of what you would do and how you would design a policy. And so you would have to optimize against both, and our science really just isn't there to do that in a practical sense. Some countries are subsidizing very expensive care as a result, while leaving behind cost-effective interventions that would make a bigger difference for health. So getting those balances and trade-offs right in practice is a huge challenge for us. And then there's the issue, you also asked us to talk about evidence for policy. So I'll just segue from that sort of concept of development and science discussion to this no-do gap idea, right? We, especially if you're looking at the issues of climate and if you're a US citizen, the no-do gap is very acute, right? And I'd say in evidence for policy, we're in the best of times and the worst of times all at once. There's more evaluation of policy than ever and in more places. There was an article in 2018 from Sabat and Brown that looks at the rapid rise of impact evaluation over the last 20 years. There was just the What Works Global Summit last week in Mexico City. They estimated that there are about 400 to 500 new evaluation studies between 2013 and 2015 each year, and that number is adding all the time. And there's a kind of evidence renaissance within some governments, not all governments, government evaluation councils and labs. The very interesting experience in the Indian Ministry of Finance, for example, where they were using administrative data to do real-time evaluation alongside policy implementation. Planning ministries that have taken evaluation on as a core part of their work. Governments using economic evaluation requirements for infrastructure projects in a much more systematic way. Health technology assessment, which is a kind of economic evaluation to inform what public subsidy goes to. All of those are expressions of the use of evidence and research in the policy process, and that's extremely exciting. And there's even a study that came out, I think it was actually last week, on evidence use. There's a study by Jonas Hort and colleagues that found that research findings, and this is very exciting if you live in the US, can change political leaders' beliefs and cause policy change. This was 2,150 municipalities in Brazil that were willing to pay to learn the results of impact evaluation and would change their priors based on that information. But it's also the worst of times. Fake news has already been mentioned, and even the contestation or the amplification of discord around basic facts. The debate on vaccines, for example, and vaccine hesitancy being a terrible example. The underrepresentation of low and middle income countries and women in the production of evidence and science. There was also last week a British Medical Journal study that looked at gender balance, and they found that only 33% of editors were women in the journal, in spite of the field being mostly female, and 33% are based in low and middle income countries. There's lots of straw men fight on methods that maybe we get into, but I'll just stop there. Of course, living in the US, we sometimes see the willful disregard of science and facts. I think that's a pendulum swing, and I hope we're headed back the other way. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we all join you in this hope. I would like to continue with Njuguna Ndungu from the AERC, the African Economic Research Consortium, which is a capacity building network in Africa in economic policy and analytical capacity. So I would like to hear from you, from an African perspective, this questioning of traditional approaches to development, the quest for a new prosperity perspective, how do you think about it? And also on the science policy interface, how does AERC contribute to strengthening that in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be invited and to come back to GDN. I used to participate in meetings, in various annual meetings, but that was when I was in AERC, then I had to take a break. Now I've rejoined the AERC now to lead the network. And AERC is a network, but the question I was asked first is, before I address the questions you have actually paraded in front of me, is that I was asked to talk about from research to sustainable development action. How far have we come? And maybe the history of the AERC is quite befitting in terms of describing what exactly, where have we come from and how much have we achieved. And it's quite interesting. AERC is a network of researchers, institutions, and the idea was actually to build capacity that would help policymaking in African institutions. But more importantly, it was actually helping capacity at the individual level, at the institutional level, that would feed into the government. So we have had 3 programs from 1988, research, graduate training in economics, and even a communications and outreach program to help disseminate the output for research. And for us, that has worked very well. Our approach has made sure that evidence policy making is actually going to be the goal in terms of in the public service. But maybe taking a step back is actually to ask when the ARC was formed, it was formed because there was need to actually help African governments in terms of trying to understand the policy space that they needed. When you look at 1988, we were operating this and see what was preference was high inflation, macro instability, brain drain, weak institutions, weak graduate training in economics in public universities, and even there was very few private universities, and even capacity constrained and poor response to any kind of policy or development policy issues. When we look at it 31 years later, that is in 2019, there is no quarrel about macro stability anymore. We understand the need and maybe the incentive for macro stability. We can see some institutional strengths in some of the ministries, for example, and even central banks. And we have seen capacity building, capacity in public institutions and even think tanks improving and actually making the policy space more, should I say, more enlightening, perhaps even more understood, and even policy space more understood. And more importantly, we have seen a period of policy clarity in most African countries. They have visions, they have strategies, and we can see that they have strategic directions. And finally, you can see that most of the African countries are taking up the digital evolution that is emerging. So we have seen all these, and we have trained, maybe to give you some numbers, we have actually trained so many African economic researchers who are found in public sector. For example, we have trained over 3,500 economic researchers, and they are based in African institutions. Everywhere you turn in Africa, you'll find in ministries of finance, central banks, and even ministries of trade, you find ARC alumni. And of course, even the research capability or even the research themes have changed and have been modified on the basis of what has been developing. For example, we started macro-based, and today we have moved even into micro aspects. For example, there is a thematic group that deals with agriculture, climate change, and natural resource management. We have seen even thematic groups coming up with production, trade, and economic integration. And we also have even projects looking at agricultural food policies and nutrition outcomes. So you can see that ARC has remodified itself in terms of what are the emerging constraints and how do we deal with emerging constraints. But more importantly, at the level of the individual capacity building, when we look around in Africa, we can see that we can actually pinpoint who are the alumni who have been there. Personally, I've been there, I've been trained in the ARC as a researcher, and I have moved on even to become a policy reader. I read the Central Bank of Kenya for 8 years, and that is the revolution on financial inclusion was taking place around that time. So we are happy about that outcome, and we can pinpoint several of such individuals in Africa. But what challenges remain anyway as we talk about that? Capacity is really an ongoing challenge. We need a critical mass, but we are not yet there. A critical mass that can move the continent to the next level in terms of policy-making space and even the diversity of policies that has been perhaps amplified in this conference. The second thing is that we haven't got that critical mass, not because we are not doing as much as we can do, but because there are also financial constraints. But anyway, that is something that we can talk about. But the second thing in the African scene is that we also have countries that are fragile in nature. They have a fragile context. Some of them, the fragility is coming from conflict. Others is coming from post-conflict recovery. Others, fragility is coming because of perhaps the collapse of commodity prices, and the management of the economies has become very challenging. So essentially, some countries have been left behind because of that. And in the AERC in the last 5 years, we had to come up with a bridge program to actually support those who are coming from fragile economies so that they can actually compete at the same level and even provide policy space in their own. And thirdly, we also have diversity. Of course, diversity also prevents us from achieving the goals that we'd like. One, diversity in terms of language constraints. The other one is gender. We haven't managed to get there because, again, the kind of discipline that we deal with. So essentially, we have actually created a space in terms of policy making, evidence-based, and even policy advice. We have created a good number of researchers who have supported the African institutions, African governments, and even supported the policy environment. But we are far from what we anticipated we could get to because of, one, the financial constraint, two, the changing nature, the dynamic nature of what is happening at the international field, things that we can pick up. Environment is a challenge. Literally, we have come up with how do we deal with poverty reduction, inequality, in the face of, for example, economic management, and all these institutions that are involved. And somehow we've come up and talked about, perhaps we may want to look at this issue and look at how can we deal with redistribution. And redistribution is a pro-poor growth. So there are so many aspects that we can deal with, but that is, first of all, to show the journey, and then we can actually debate the specific questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this, your achievements, but also your outlook into the future with us. Now I would like to come to Mauricio Cárdenas. You have been Colombia's Minister of Finance and Public Credit from 2012 to 2018, so you know the science policy interface from both sides. And currently you are a visiting professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, which is also very much engaged in sustainable development questions. So what is your view on these two challenges I have mentioned?
Well, thank you very much. I have to begin by saying that I'm delighted to be back at these annual conferences of GDN. I used to participate very actively up until about 10 years ago. So it's great to be here, and it's great to see old faces and to meet new faces. I also like to start also by mentioning that Guillermo Perry is a dear friend of mine who passed away a few weeks ago, who was a member of the board of GDN for many years and someone who really worked hard to make this organization as vital as it is. And he was supposed to chair one of the sessions in the afternoon. I'm going to say a few more words about him then, but I just wanted to acknowledge how sad it is not to be here with him. He was a Colombian, a good friend, a very close colleague. On the topic of this session, I'd like to start by saying the positive aspects about the Sustainable Development Goals and the efforts that the world is making into achieving the SDGs, in my view, are related to the fact that we have really moved a step forward in terms of the discussion about development. Not too long ago, I was trained as an economist in the late 80s, and the main debate at that time was about growth convergence. It was about what countries needed to do to accelerate growth so that they could reach the level of per capita income that the advanced economies have. And that was already considered as a big improvement relative to the more mechanistic view of the Chenery model that was about how much do you need to invest to make sure that you grow faster and then do you reach the level of income of the advanced economies. In the growth convergence literature, at least, there were some other variables to consider in order to accelerate economic growth and to allow the economies to converge. This is not what SDGs are about. SDGs are about something very different. SDGs are not about convergence. SDGs are about everyone moving ahead. SDGs are not about reaching the living standards that today the advanced economies have. SDGs are about making our living standards sustainable. SDGs are about challenges that every country has, advanced, emerging, developing countries. So in my view, it's already a big achievement that we're talking in those terms. But having said that, it is also true that if we just keep going in a business as usual mode, we're not going to achieve the SDGs. First of all, 2030 is just around the corner. It's a relatively short period of time. And I see two major reasons why if we keep doing what we're doing now, we will not get there. And one of them has to do with research and science, which is the topic of this conversation. And another one has to do with a broader discussion about public finance. And you would wonder, why is it public finance relevant in this conversation? Well, the SDGs are essentially the concept of achieving in a coordinated way through collective action some goals. SDGs are a lot about delivery of public goods. SDGs require a lot of state capacity. SDGs cannot be achieved just by the market. So at the same time that we have these big aspirations about SDGs, we're seeing in the world a race to the bottom in terms of taxation. I just heard the news that India is proposing a reduction in the corporate tax to 25%. We have already, the IMF has a really nice chart on the race to the bottom, basically showing how dramatic has been the decline in corporate taxes for all groupings of countries, not just for the advanced economies. So will we have the resources, the public resources, to deliver the SDGs? If we keep basically doing what we're doing now, which is a lot of tax competition and very little tax coordination, we're not going to get it because we will just not have the resources. I was just recently reading the book by Suckman and Saiz on taxation and the injustices of taxation. And by reading that book, I learned that in the entry hall of the IRS in Washington, there is this encryption of a phrase that was probably pronounced by one of the founders of the IRS, which is, taxes are what we pay for civilization. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt added to that some want to get civilization for free. And I would add to that to get to the Sustainable Development Goals, we need basically the taxes to pay for civilization as we see it and as we understand it today, a civilization that is sustainable. That's what the SDGs are about. And we're not going to get that for free. And we're not going to get that if we keep lowering taxes. And the reduction in taxes, if you think about it, if you think long enough about this, it creates also an advantage to the more advanced economies, because the more advanced economies have already built the infrastructure. They already have the educational attainment that we will desire. in a way they can afford cutting their taxes. But this is not so much the case of the developing and emerging economies, because we have not built that capital yet. So the race to the bottom poses an even more challenging problem to the developing and emerging economies. And that's what I think it's very important that we as a group of researchers, scientists, individuals, we think twice about this idea of the race to the bottom. Because it's so easy for the politicians in our governments to say, we're cutting taxes because otherwise we will not be able to compete. Our companies are going to leave. They're going to move somewhere else. So we need to be aware that if we don't bring this conversation and we give the same status as the SDGs to the conversation about taxes, we're not going to be able to succeed. So that's quickly the point about public finance. On research, just very, very quickly. SDGs are complex. We have 17 areas, and each one of these areas is in itself, the goals in themselves have a lot of more detailed, more detailed goals that are part of these broad categories. So there are always tensions. When you define development in a broad way, not all the goals move in the same direction. Let me illustrate this with an example. We just saw the riots that took place in Ecuador. And those were coming from the fact that the government was raising gasoline prices or reducing gasoline subsidies. Think of that as what we want in terms of carbon taxes. Reduce subsidies or increase the price of fossil fuels. But the people generated very angrily against that. Not too different from what happened in France with the yellow vests. And this is because people feel that with the increases in these taxes, they're losing in terms of their living standards, in terms of their well-being, which, by the way, is another goal. You have to reduce poverty. You have to make sure that their income grows. It's another goal of the SDGs. So there are lots of tensions. How do you alleviate tensions? How do you resolve those trade-offs? This is where science can play actually a very important role. Figuring out ways in which we find solutions that make it easier to achieve these goals. For example, in the carbon emissions area, not everything is the carbon tax. Maybe we can find ways in which we change behavior through other mechanisms, or we reduce carbon emissions by thinking about issues related, for example, to agriculture or the way we produce industrial products like heavy industries, cement, etc. So I'm going to stop here. Science can help us a lot in reducing these tensions and the trade-offs of goals that at one point or another can be conflicting. Sorry.
Thank you, Mauricio. With I think your point about public policies and having the financial basis for implementing them is very important, because it points out again that the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda is about the common good and not about an idea of development as increasing individual incomes, but the structures and systems in which this can contribute to the common good. So I think I'll take John first, and then Pierre, you can close it. And as I said, I will go a little bit into the break, less than I had anticipated, but I think I can take 2 questions or comments. So get prepared, please. And then I will be extremely subjective in choosing who I will take. So John Yang, I know you from your time at ODI, where you invested a lot in improving the capacities of ODI to productively deal with the science policy interface. And now you are the executive director of the International Network for the Availability of Scientific Publications. Please.
Very good. First of all, we changed our name. We are now INASP. So we have the same acronym, but it's Advancing Science and Policy. It's not just about availability of scientific publications, but we haven't told anybody that yet. This is the first forum we've announced that in, and that's the last you'll hear about it, because it's not a big deal, except when people say, oh, what exactly does INASP stand for? And you have to explain that actually we've moved on along since then. I'm not a development academic, I'm not an economist, I'm not a political scientist, I'm a veterinarian. I only understand problems I can actually get my hands on. And most of my veterinary life I worked with cattle, so it was actually more about hands in than hands on. Anyway, so I'm going to focus much more on the second question, which is what can we do to maximize the production and use of research-based evidence for development policy and practice, which, as Imi has pointed out, I've worked on for about 20 years. And actually, we know how to do this. It's not rocket science. We know how to do this. The real question is, why don't we do it? And it really is very simple. Be very clear about the problem you're trying to solve. People talk about having a clear policy objective. The problem is, if you use the word policy, people immediately start thinking about legislation and policies and regulations and budgets and programs. But it's much, much broader than that. It's about how ideas emerge. It's about how people interact in order to set policies. It's about bringing stakeholders together to decide what to do, and then how to support policy implementation. So I think the first thing we need to do is to be much broader when we think about what's the impact of our work. Secondly, you need to understand the context. Who are the key stakeholders? What are the political and economic incentives that they face which govern their behavior? What are the prevalent policy narratives you might need to change about the race to the bottom and minimum taxation, for example? Who needs what information when to make what decision? And that's what we've got to focus on. Some people call this political context analysis. You need to engage with all of the stakeholders. It needs to be a participatory, collaborative process involving all the stakeholders that you're dealing with. If you're dealing with changing the discourse, it's academia. If you're dealing with changing the way that programs are delivered, it may be this, civil servants and operational agencies and civil society. You need to involve them all in a participatory process. And the cool words these days are co-design and implementation of research, co-analysis of results, and co-production of recommendations. This is sometimes called transdisciplinary research. So this is the kind of research I think we should be doing. You clearly need to do good research. I'm not going to spend time talking about that, but of course that's absolutely fundamental to the whole process of promoting rigorous evidence-based policy and practice. You need to be very flexible. You need to keep your eye on the long-term outcome you're heading towards. And as things progress and as evidence emerges, you need to always be asking yourself, is this the right objective? Do we need to change the objective? Am I doing the right things to get there? Do I need to change what I'm doing in order to get there? If the answer to any of those is no, then you change. Now, this is sometimes called adaptive management. I've tended to call it for a long time strategic opportunism, which is very different to an opportunistic strategy. You need to, and I've written down here, communicate with all stakeholders throughout the project. Classical policy research says, identify the people who need to know and when, and give them the information they need to know in the way that's most appropriate for them. And that's, of course, right, but actually it's a much longer process than that throughout the whole cycle. This is sometimes called good communication. And then there are a few other prerequisites and approaches, I think, for development research to be useful and effective in the long term. You need stable, secure, long-term funding. It's very difficult to do high-quality, useful research with impact to short deadlines, especially involving the sort of engagement that I've been talking about. And research organizations need some core funding, not very much. They need some core funding in order, at the very least, to provide good training and career development for their staff. And you need what we call effective, equitable partnerships. It's no longer good enough for researchers in developed countries to regard research partners in developing countries as the field workers who will do their data collection for them while we get on and do the interesting analysis and publish in the high-ranking journals. There needs to be equitable sharing of resources, roles, responsibilities, and results. And capacity building needs to be at the core of it all. Development research, by its nature, is always changing, always exploring new issues, often using new approaches. So capacity development of all stakeholders is absolutely fundamental, needs to be embedded throughout the whole process. And that's not just for researchers in developing countries, it's for researchers in developed countries who need to understand there's a different way to do research if they really want to collaborate with colleagues in developing countries to try and find solutions to the prevalent problems. And we in INASP believe that for research and knowledge to be at the heart of development, we need to be constantly working to support what we call equitable knowledge ecosystems wherever we work. And that means that developing country research agendas should be set by developing countries themselves, not by the donors, the international donors who have most of the money. Research organizations at subnational level, who are often much more closely involved with looking at practical problems than leading universities in capital cities, who are often much more driven by publications in international peer-reviewed journals, they must have equal access to the resources they need to do the research. And researchers in developing countries have to have equal access to international journals and equal ability to publish in them. And national journals need to get the support that they need to improve standards so that they can be recognized as an equally valid source of evidence. That women and people from excluded groups have an equal ability to pursue research careers. And that academic, experiential, evaluation, cultural and indigenous knowledge is all recognized as being equally valid as we try to find solutions to these problems which we all face. But I've also been asking me another question. How can we disrupt the current development research knowledge system so that southern researchers have preferential access to southern and northern knowledge so that they can contribute more effectively to solving the global development problems? What is the Uber or Airbnb or Amazon or Google of the development research ecosystem, and how can we avoid the regressive aspects of those? I was talking to someone the other day who works with academic publishers in the UK, helping them to figure out how they can make their content more accessible and useful to users. She said it's no longer about PDFs of journal articles on the web, or even about summarized bits of journals searchable. It's about using AI and machine learning to interrogate data to answer questions like, how can we improve learning in primary schools in rural Malawi? A bit like Google can do already, actually. But wouldn't it be brilliant if we could infect Google's search algorithm with a bit of code which preferentially selected rigorous transdisciplinary southern research and brought that to the surface so that that kind of evidence can be more visible and more used in solving these problems which we all face.
Okay, thank you. How to disrupt the knowledge system we are part of, actually, and we are benefiting from or not? I think this is a very important question we can follow on the next days. So, Pierre, what do you make out of all of this? What is your view from GDN perspective?
Well, thank you very much, Ima. And I would say it's not only how to disrupt, it's also how to get the funding to disrupt. And funding disruptions is always something that is not very popular with potential funders. So that's one of the issues that I hope we can collectively discuss also during these 3 days. I remember a paper by Dudley Sears, an economist of development, well known, who was a former head of IDS in Sussex, in 1977, and he was asking one question. He was asking why development studies were focusing mainly on so-called developing countries, while many advanced countries showed the same pathologies. And he was calling for a universal approach to development. And I think we are there now. He was actually visionary. It was more than 40 years ago. And I think that right now we are confronted with this idea that development is a universal concept. And it is for two reasons that were mentioned in this panel. One is that there are indeed global public good and need for collective action. And that requires shared understanding and shared action. But it goes beyond that. There are also common problems. Poverty is no longer only a poor country's problem. It's a problem in advanced societies as well. Inequality, obviously, pollution, and many others. So this, for me, has at least two major implications. One on research and social sciences, and one on our understanding of policy. Let me start with research. In the past, we had developed countries and developing countries, and there was a gap between the two. And one major objective was to fill the gap. And it was quite natural to understand research as a way to fill the gap. That created problems because this gap was thought as a pathology, and research was administered by research doctors knowing that pathologies and recommending cures to the patient. So it was a north-south vertical view of the use of research, providing solutions that developing countries should, if they were wise, apply in the elaboration of their policies. There are things to say for that view. I mean, indeed, knowledge and research is accumulated in some of the best universities, and researchers have things to say that are very relevant to a host of problems, including problems in developing countries. But I think this oriented research toward almost exclusively a normative view, what should be done to meet objectives, to address the gap, and so on. And when lost, what I think is a very, very, very fundamental use of research, which is the positive aspect of research. What is a problem about? How to analyze information? How to collect data? Not to tell people what to do, but just to understand the challenges that have to be faced. This role of research to describe problems, to evaluate options, to provide information, to describe and share experience, to transform experience into transmissible knowledge, which is a major use of research. This has been a little bit forgotten for the profit and the benefit of normative research, providing solutions and telling people what to do. What we are trying to do at GDN is make the case that we need to restore the former approach to research, which is really a way to understand the world, to provide information, to address problems, not necessarily to provide solutions, but to show that academic methods provide very useful insights. And that's something that requires a very deliberate effort. Let me move to policies. In the heyday of public policy analysis, what dominated was the engineering view of policies. Public policy was in a sort of mechanistic process, transforming inputs, policy inputs, into outputs. And if you know that process, through optimization, you can reach the objective you want. You set the objectives, and the economists will tell you what to do to get these objectives. Well, the problem, as we all know, is that public policy is not a mechanistic process. It is a political process. And during that process, things change. There are shocks, there are news, there are knowledge gaps. So the response has been to use knowledge to fill the knowledge gaps. But that's totally illusory. This idea that knowledge can be complete is an illusion. So we have to think policy as a need to take decision in contexts in which we don't have the required knowledge. And research then doesn't bridge a knowledge gap, it brings methods. How to react to uncertainty, how to react to shocks. And the way in which research can inform policies is by empowering decision makers to take their decisions, not by telling them what to do. Because the what to do is defined in a context in which, based on knowledge of the past, it becomes a deterministic view of policy. Policy is always reacting to uncertain and unknown shocks, and that is something that requires a totally different approach to research and to the connection between research and policy. So that's what I wanted to say, because, and as a conclusion, this use of research has to be based on local research. It cannot be based on foreign research doctors knowing better than you what needs to be done in an uncertain environment, which is your environment. And that is the reason why we strongly believe in capacity building. The GDN mission and identity is to promote research capacity building in the poorest countries, and that is something that is in a very, very strong need of renewed funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. That was a great final position, I must say, of this panel.
It's a beginning position.
Yeah, but we are at a beginning position, exactly. And I think what your point made very clear that we can't talk about universal processes of change if there are places where there is not enough research capacity and a capacity also on the side of policymakers to understand problems and define own answers that are adapted to the local conditions. So actually, we have reached the end of this panel, I'm very sorry to say. I think all of the contributions have, in total, show a great picture of what the topics are. I think there were also some controversial points maybe across different nuances across the panel. I thank you all very much for this. The panelists have done a great job. I haven't, because I have failed because the idea of this opening panel was actually to show we want to have a very strong interaction with the audience. So it's clear that this has failed, but I hope that the future panels will be better equipped to do so because they will have a bit more time. So I thank you all, and I would like to take two questions or comments just as a symbol of what was the intention. And I invite you all to approach the panelists in the breaks and in future sessions and continue the conversation. So I see two over there. Yes, please, over there. Yeah, use the mic.
No, it doesn't work. You need to use the mobile mic.
Okay, the question that I have is not addressed to any individual speaker. Maybe a number of speakers touched on the theme of unified science versus indigenous or localized knowledge. And I think that's the hub of the problem. Because whenever we talk about this, as if we have two choices. And I would argue that it's a false choice. It's not universal versus local. That's misleading. It's a very popular subject, indigenous knowledge. But if we look at very concrete cases, Abhijit Banerjee is a very concrete case. Is he local knowledge or universal knowledge? He is universal knowledge applied to local conditions. I think that's exactly what we should be looking at. Let's live from this false dichotomy, universal versus local. There is no such dichotomy in a highly globalized world. Consider this, please.
Thank you. Over here.
I want to respond.
Thank you. Two comments. One, I think, linked to the previous comment, it's central to have public good of information because it's not just local, because I completely agree with the idea that we have to build enormous capacities at the country level, but the restrictions are higher than that. For example, if I want to study literature and I want to study the life of a Nobel Prize, Vargas Llosa, all his manuscripts are in Princeton. So I am Peruvian, he's Peruvian. I cannot learn nothing of him unless I go to Princeton to look at all the manuscripts. So we need to find ways in which we can make public good of all the information, so it's not only capacity building, but it's also access to knowledge. And the second thing, which is really important, I think Mauricio mentioned about the SDGs, but there are silos, and we're not looking at the interrelationship between them and the trade-offs between them. And that's what Amanda was trying to bring up. I think that's central, Because there is no way I can achieve the SDGs if I don't achieve SDG 1 and 2. But inequality is crucial. If I don't put people at $7 a day, I won't move them out of poverty sustainable, but I have sustainability at the same time. So there are a lot of trade-offs that I need to take into account, and most of our work is silo-based, and the same links between social science and science. The only way we will be able to resolve this is we bring them together, and all the incentives are not to bring them together.
Thank you. I would like to remind SDG 10, inequality from a structural point of view is also very, very important. There is a third one over there. I was just told that we have a bit more time. So I'm surprised how time can grow. Yeah, okay, we'll first take you here, behind you. And then we go over to you.
Yeah, my question is to Mauricio Cardenas. Thank you for bringing up the issue of the race to the bottom phenomenon. But race to the bottom essentially becoming a global governance issue. That issue of national finance is actually related to the global governance and global rules. How do you see in this context the failing global governance institutions and also the role of the public sector in it? Thank you.
And that's the fourth one over there. You have to wait for the mic. It's coming. And then, as we have more time, you can answer to these. And then we probably have even time to take some more.
Yeah, thank you, Immer. My name is Adolf Klokelesch from SDS in Germany. I, in the first place, rose my hands to remind you that the coffee is only available after 11 o'clock, so we have indeed time.
Oh, that's the answer. Okay, thank you. Fine.
And you have to deserve coffee.
But I wanted to take up what has been said about public finance and the critical role, and link that to the issue on how do we need to move forward to actually move beyond our own silo. We have in Europe now a discussion whether the SDGs will inform the financial frameworks of the European Union. That is a 7-year financial framework from 21 to 27. So that is the SDG period. And we have a European semester that assesses all member states whether they live up to certain economic standards. And there is big political obstacles to introduce the SDGs into this area. And even in the economic sciences and in science working on European studies and finance, people don't take up this issue. So if we want to become really universal, we need to engage those academic silos or other academic areas that actually work on the implementation of the SDGs in the richer countries. And only by doing so, we can break up the so-called apartheid between the North-South dialogue on sciences, while not letting in Southern sciences into the scientific exchange within the so-called North. Thank you.
Thank you. There will be a second round. So we have heard one comment on considering indigenous knowledge and not seeing as an antagonist to academic knowledge. We had the point about how to break up the silos or bring them together. A question on race to the bottom to Mauricio Cardenas specifically. And then the last comment on how to crack up conventional disciplinary approaches and join the critical discussions which we are having here on universal sustainable development and how to bring it into the core of where economic and financial policies are made, for example, in the EU. So I give it back to you. Maybe we start with you this time.
Okay, I'd like to comment on two issues. One is universal versus local debate, and the other one is bridging the silos. On the universal versus local, I think the relevant distinction is between the nature of knowledge, which is a global public good, and the use of knowledge, which is about local politics. And for me, this political process means that knowledge, unless it is owned locally, will not be effective in guiding action. That is why we need capacity locally, either to produce knowledge or to intermediate knowledge coming from elsewhere. So the building of research capacity is not positioning oneself for local research as opposed to global research. It is part of a research to action chain in which if you forget politics, you will produce knowledge, but that knowledge is not used because you have not thought out the political process which consists in using knowledge. And using knowledge is always politics, about politics. It's about even using knowledge to build arguments in the debate, to defend your position. So that's something I think which is very important. So it's not a local versus universal in the conception of knowledge. It is when you look at the whole process chain between production and knowledge and use of knowledge, more focus is needed on the local dimension. Now, on the silos, I think one of the main issues is that nobody really knows, or at least if there is that knowledge, it is not disseminated and accepted, how to measure quality of interdisciplinary work. The monitoring and measure of quality of research is itself defined in silos. Economists know, and that can be criticized, by the way, but at least there is some conventional wisdom about how to measure quality in economic work, in social sciences as well, in political sciences as well. But these are not compatible with each other because that is strongly related to the methods that are used. So I think what we need to do if we want to promote multidisciplinary approaches is work together to establish acceptable standards of quality, because without demonstrating quality, we will never get what is needed to support multidisciplinary research. So for me, that's an essential aspect. We all have some ideas about how to do it, but it's a central effort to conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. I think there is some work actually in the scientific arena, obviously, on what have we learned from multidisciplinary work, also what have we learned about best approaches to transdisciplinary cooperation, so practice knowledge actors and academic knowledge actors. And I think this is worthwhile working on, but often, I know there are some contributions about that in Germany, and they are only in German. So that is also a barrier. Mauricio, there was a specific question for you.
Yes, and I'll try to be very brief. You are absolutely right. It's an issue of governance. And what worries me the most is that rather than making progress in terms of global governance, we're actually regressing. Because think of trade, for example. Think of the climate agreement. So the more countries withdraw from these agreements, the harder it is to achieve the goals. In terms of tax policies, of course, it would be easier if we had some coordination. The OECD is doing very interesting work on the issue of tax havens and what they call profit shifting, or the programs to reduce the profit shifting to jurisdictions with lower taxes, but are essentially recommendations. They're not enforceable. And the advanced economies, and notably the United States, really wants that not to be enforceable, just at the level of advice and suggestions. The Europeans have an important role to play, and a vested interest as well. So I think the Europeans could actually play a very important role in advancing that agenda.
Thank you. John?
I'd just like to comment on this idea about universal and indigenous knowledge and transdisciplinary research. And I think that's the solution. And there is actually quite a lot written in other languages now about it. And it's basically, it seems to me, a very simplistic, logical progression. You've got disciplinary science, where people do their own thing and they publish in academic journals. You've got multidisciplinary research, where people do their own thing, but kind of working alongside each other, and they share the results in conferences, and that's quite a good thing. And then you've got interdisciplinary research, which is where researchers from different disciplines collaborate together on a common problem and pool their methods and pool their approaches and pool their results, and together figure out what does this all mean. And then there's transdisciplinary research, which is that, but working with all the other stakeholders involved in the process, so policy makers, practitioners, operational agencies, civil society. bringing together all forms of knowledge collectively to decide what to do about a particular problem. And this is where the co-words come in. It's co-identification of the challenge, co-implementation of the research and co-analysis of the results, and then co-production of recommendations. So people together pool all of that knowledge and make the best decision they can make at that time based on the knowledge that they have available about what to do next to move towards a solution towards the problem.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, and it also underlines your point about longer-term funding, because these endeavors obviously have more time needs and require much more time for preparation and for keeping everybody involved in the process. It's very new ground, actually. Amanda.
So just to say, the Global Sustainable Development Report Group recommends the creation of a more systematic field of sustainability science, rather than hoping that all the silos will be able to work together and live happily ever after. And the idea, I guess, would be to study those places in between. So it's not just water from an environmental perspective, it's water from a livelihoods perspective and from an economic growth perspective, and water as a common good. So trying to look at those issues in a more holistic way. It's not clear to me whether that is a feasible plan, but it is certainly an interesting idea that I think is worth exploring. As a person who works in the space between public health and economics, I very much feel that economists actually have a very important role to play in this field and are not present at this time in a way that is important. Or there are environmental economists that are looking at very specific parts, but then how that relates to the macro fiscal agenda, how it relates to public finance is still quite incipient. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Can I just add something on that? You see, that will create another silo. It will create a silo of sustainability science.
Silos work, yes.
But I think what we're finding is they don't work. They're not an effective mechanism to address complex real-world problems. We need to break down the silos.
Silos of silos.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's actually about the parameters, how we state, what do we take as a basis for saying it works? And you said it doesn't work for addressing real-world problems, but it does work for getting funding, for getting a reputation, for publishing. But that's clearly not enough.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will come back to the point about the knowledge generation. I think, I think the conviction of the vision of the AERC is that knowledge generation is going to be appropriate as long as the policymakers themselves are well informed about the problems they face, the dimension of the problems, the solutions that are required, and what are the expected outcomes. And that is actually the kind of picture that we actually try to paint. Of course, disruptions are always occurring these days. It means that disruption is actually improving the ways of how we deliver things, how we deliver the output. And for us, that is very, very important. Let me come to the question of public finance. I like the issue about race to the bottom. But if you go to the African economies, the advice we have always provided is to make sure that the taxes, for example, the fiscal policy position or even public finance, is actually commensurate with the projects that you want to deliver. Because essentially you find that most of the taxation creates disincentives. That's why we have capital fright and all those problems that we get domestically. Our argument is that we have a new project that we want to look at, capital fright, domestic resource mobilization, and even digital economy. And we have seen African countries using the digital divide, the digital platforms to actually design new taxes and even tax payment platforms that are efficient. For us, it is the efficiency we are looking at, and also making sure that any tax does not distort the platform. And I think Pierre, you raised the issue about funding. Of course, what has changed in the last 30 years, the ERC has been in existence, is that most of the institutions that fund research and even capacity building have tended to move away from core funding or long-term funding to earmarked funding, because they would like short-term funding, they would like project funding to see quick results. Yes. But we started with knowledge generation, capacity building to try and strengthen institutions. That takes a bit of time. That takes a long time. So we come back to rethink about knowledge generation, but we are also thinking about how do we effect that in the long term. That is where we are, and that is where the challenges are. And I think that is what we may need to debate in terms of what are the optimal solutions for this. Because capacity building will be required for the future, and it's going to take a long time to effect that capacity, and even to see the work of that capacity. We don't want to talk about attributions anymore. We want to see the actual output or the actual outcome of that capacity.
Thank you very much for this. We have not answered the question about how to actually get our insights from this sustainable development debate into the core of economic and fiscal policy debates and thinking, actually, in the EU, for example, where we know that there is a very hard and iron resistance to actually facing what inequality means.
Just one point on this. I think there would be a legitimate direction for social science to take, which is to develop more research on the use of research, because that's an area which is, I think, poorly understood. I mean, what dominates is this view that research provides knowledge and then action is about using that knowledge. I think it would be very interesting from various case studies probably to understand better about how knowledge is used in the decision-making process and to what purpose, by the way, because the social utility of research is not only to provide implementable solutions. It is also to inform, as I argued earlier. It is to be used in the democratic debate. Democracy is about informed debate. It's not about the deterministic aspect of existing solutions. So knowledge is used also to build arguments. There is a recent book on the use of reason that argues that reason is not primarily there to help you discover truth. It is there to help you convince others. And I think there is something in there, and understanding that social utility of knowledge and of research would be, I think, very interesting.
Thank you. So we had you, please, and there's a young person, that's great, and a lady there in the back. Okay.
Thank you. In fact, I want to go back to the point raised by Mauricio Cardenas on taxation. If I understood you correctly, you said that lowering taxes does not serve the objectives of sustainable development. But what is the implication of what you are saying? That we should really have a progressive tax system whereby the rich bear a greater burden, which in turn links to John Young's point that the process should be a participatory process of attaining the objectives of sustainable development. Is this what you're saying? That we should really have progressive taxation and making the rich share a greater burden of development? Thank you.
Now over here. Yeah. First here, the young man from here over. Lift your hand. The mic is coming, but you have to show that you want the mic. And then the lady there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. My question is related to just the one that just spoke now. I'm Nanle from Nigeria, and I'm in Hungary now. I'm concerned about the issue of the taxation related to sustainable development. Coming from a country that is not so much developed, do you think that increase in taxation is the way forward in achieving this sustainable development in my country, for example? Or is there a way it can be balanced, considering a huge number of people that are in poverty and they are not at the same level with developed nations? How can we put a balance to achieve the goal by 2030? Thank you.
And now the lady in the back, in green.
Thank you. My name is Veena Sikri. I'm from India. For 10 years now, I've been running a group called the South Asia Women's Network, where we bring together women from 9 countries of South Asia and also Myanmar. And I think that the discussion on knowledge is very important, There is a global fund of knowledge, but are you including gender issues in that knowledge? The perception about what is important to developing countries is quite different in the North and in the South, among the developed and the developing world. And no matter what the quality of research may be, and you may think that developing countries will not be able to do the research, but unfortunately you're not taking into account what the developing countries think is important for them. The absence of gender in this debate is absolutely surprising, because we know that for the first time in the SDGs, gender has been included not only in number 5, SDG number 5, but also in a lot of the other SDGs. It is a recognition that without gender, there can be no sustainable development. And the gap between access for women and men in developing countries and in many developed countries is remarkable. This has to be taken into account, and we have done it. Our empirical research shows that without taking into account the factor of gender, sustainable development is not going to be possible. It's not a matter of resources. It is not a matter of resources. It's not a matter of communication of knowledge. It's a matter that this aspect has not been given enough force and strength. Food, fuel, energy, water. Women in developing countries are solely responsible, but they have not been made stakeholders in the development process. They are just objects of development. They're being told what to do. I wonder if this aspect can be looked at by anybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, you can applaud. So we come to the, yeah, okay, I take you also, and then we have 5 minutes for closing.
Thank you. I just want to raise, my name is Jashodhara and I'm from India. I just want to raise a question about something that I see is the elephant in the room, but which I didn't clearly hear any of the speakers talk about, and that is the role of the for-profit sector. So the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals is that the for-profit sector is seen as an equal stakeholder. And yet I've heard all of you only talk about public policy, public finance, and sort of research for taking public decisions and the politics that you talked about. And I just heard Amanda talk about water. So where water is getting privatized, how do you use research to inform policies of the for-private sector? And how do you use research to also assess the impact that the for-profit sector is having on all the elements that affect the world? Because this is not a group that believes in leaving no one behind. This is not a group that believes in social justice and equity.
Thank you. So I think we start again with the taxation. So the question was, should it be progressive? What are models for introducing taxation in LDCs, in poor countries?
So 3 brief comments. If you ask me for a specific country, should we increase taxes, for example, in Nigeria? My main message here is countries, individual countries, have restrictions. There are limits to what you can do, mainly because others are doing different things. And it's precisely that calls for these coordination. So a country can aspire to increase taxes, but may not be able to do it if it faces a competition from other countries. Is this about growth or is this about distribution? I think both. I think you need revenues to deliver these public goods that are important for a number of the SDGs. But a component of the SDGs is also about the reduction in inequality. And that calls for progressive taxation. So I think progressive taxation is also part of the equation. So the point I want to make is the advice of the multilateral organizations has been for a number of years, do use government expenditures for the distribution and try to tax with consumption taxes. I think that advice is not right. You need to use taxes also for the distribution, and you need to make sure that you have sufficient revenues. And you don't have sufficient revenues unless you use income taxes, corporate taxes, personal income taxes. It's important. Otherwise, you just don't have the resources to deliver the public goods that countries need to achieve the SDGs.
Thank you. I would just like to add a research result we had in our institute. A colleague modeled economic growth policies for reducing poverty and combined it with trends in rising emissions. And he found out that growth policies without redistribution lead to much higher CO2 emissions than with redistributive policies. So if you want to know more about it, I'll tell you the name of my colleague. Who would like to answer about the importance and how to include gender issues?
I'll do it.
You take that.
No, I think obviously the point is very well taken. You know, I recently discovered a study that looks at the determinants of US macro growth from 1960 until today. And basically 40% of that growth is related to women's and black men's ability to access different occupational choices, more productive occupational choices. Do you think that in any macro meeting you have been at lately, there is any discussion of that in any significance? The World Development Report on Gender Equality goes into some of those issues, but this is obviously, it's an area that has been ignored by the mainstream. So, I think it's really on all of us to make sure that that is incorporated in all of our work. Thanks.
About the for-profit sector, I think that was also directed to you.
Yeah. So I think one of the big roles of researchers, whether you're working in a university or a think tank or a research institution or even the United Nations, is to provide accountability and document the impact of policy, whether it's happening, privatization is a policy that needs to be examined. I think you also have to look at, well, what is the most efficient way to deliver services? What is the sustainable meaning you can actually implement it way of receiving services? It's the case that many public water services have not been able to guarantee water access. That's why these other solutions were developed. But just to say, I think that it's an important role for all of us to be looking at how public policy in any way is affecting the delivery of these key services. I don't know if others have a view on that, holding the for-profit sector accountable.
Mm-hmm. Pierre, you wanted to add to that?
After this plenary session, there will be 4 parallel sessions, and all of them deserve being attended, of course. But one of them is about impact investing, and this immediately relates, of course, to this role of the private sector and how to use research to understand what the private sector is doing and to help the private sector also think about the broad social impact. So that's something that is central indeed to the conception of the use of research. But the way in which the private sector can contribute to social impacts is tightly related to the role of the public sector as well. What we are talking about is really a new conception of public-private partnerships, which is not about specific contracts for water delivery. It goes to involving the private sector to produce common goods. And that is something that was thought to be a primary responsibility of the public sector, but increasingly now it is understood that that cannot be reached without the participation of all stakeholders, NGOs obviously, but also the private for-profit sector.
Well, these are starting answers to the questions we're having, but we are having time in front of us to go deeper. So obviously now I'm quite happy that the failure has been mended, and I thank the audience for being so active. I see that you're not using yet the online tool for asking questions, so maybe that's something you could test the next hours. Thank you. The coffee should be there now. Ramona, maybe you want to tell when the next sessions will continue?
You have to download the app, and then there's
11:30.
section.
Okay. Enjoy your coffee. Thank you.